Welcome to the unseen horror. Darkness lurks where you least expect it. Shadows move when no one is watching. Here, nightmares come to life, and fear has a voice. If you crave spine-chilling tales, eerie mysteries, and stories that haunt your soul long after the screen fades to black, you're in the right place. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, never look behind you. Subscribe if you dare. Welcome to today's video, where we dive into a mind-bending psychological thriller, The Vanishing Hour. Buckle up, because this one will mess with your head.
Her temples, exhaling sharply as she grabbed her constantly buzzing phone. She hated late-night calls. They either meant bad news or a case so twisted that sleep wasn't an option. "This better be good," she muttered, answering. Her assistant, Ria, didn't waste time. "Neha, this case is different. It's happening every single day. One person disappears, like clockwork, at exactly 6:15 p.m. Neha frowned. "That precise? How did they know?" The police checked call records. Each victim was on a call with family or a friend before vanishing. The conversations lasted over 10 minutes, and then, at 6:15 sharp, silence. All the family members heard was the phone hitting the ground. When they went looking, all they found was the victim's phone, and a letter. Neha's pulse quickened. A letter? Yeah, some kind of cryptic message. The cops can't decipher it. Neha swung her legs out of bed, reaching for a notepad. "Get me the police reports. Every letter, every detail." By morning, Neha sat at her cluttered desk, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside her. Ria dumped a thick file onto the table. "Everything you asked for," Ria said, pushing her glasses up. "Also, the police found something new." Neha flipped through the case reports, stopping when she saw an evidence photo. A folded piece of paper. "What is this?" she asked. Ria hesitated. They found the same cryptic message inside the first victim's house. He got it the morning of his disappearance. His mother handed it to him. He thought it was a joke and tossed it aside before leaving for work. Neha tapped her pen against the desk. "And you're saying every victim got a letter before they vanished?" "Exactly. 14 victims, 14 letters. All ignored." A bad feeling crawled up Neha's spine. Whoever was behind this wasn't just taking people randomly. They were warning them first. Then, a knock at the door. The office peon walked in, dropping a stack of documents on her desk. "Courier for you, ma'am." Neha barely acknowledged him as she sifted through the papers. But then, she froze. There, nestled between the reports, was an envelope. A plain, unmarked envelope. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. A single sheet of paper unfolded in her hands. The same gibberish text. Her stomach clenched. Ria looked over her shoulder. "Neha, that's the same letter." Neha's breath turned shallow. The meaning was clear. She was next. Neha stared at the letter in her hands, her pulse hammering in her ears. The symbols on the paper were nonsensical random letters, overlapping strokes, and something that resembled an inverted question mark. But the weight of what it meant wasn't lost on her. This was the same kind of letter that had arrived for each of the missing victims. And today, it had been delivered to her. Her assistant, Ria, stood frozen across the desk, eyes wide with realization. "Neha, does this mean?" She trailed off, voice unsteady. Neha's grip on the paper tightened. "It means I have until 6:15 p.m. A heavy silence settled between them. The newsroom, usually buzzing with ringing phones and reporters barking into headsets, felt eerily distant. The air conditioning hummed, the clock on the wall ticked steadily, marching toward the inevitable. Neha took a deep breath and forced her voice to remain level. "We need to analyze this letter. Get me every single detail on the previous ones, the handwriting, the ink, the paper. There has to be a pattern." Ria snapped out of her shock and grabbed a file from the desk. "Already compiled it, but Neha, the cops analyzed these letters. No fingerprints, no identifiable handwriting, no connection between the victims. It's like these notes came from thin air." Neha tapped the letter against the table, her mind racing. "They don't come from thin air. Someone is sending them, and someone is watching." At that moment, a gust of wind blew through the half-open blinds. Neha's eyes flicked toward the window. The street outside was just as it had been all morning, cars rushing past, pedestrians going about their business. But for the first time, she felt a presence. A chill crawled up her spine. She wasn't just reporting this case anymore. She was living it. By 3:07 p.m., Neha had barricaded herself in her office with crime scene photos, police reports, and every cryptic letter sent to the previous victims. Each letter contained the same bizarre symbols, except for one small variation in each. "Ria, look at this," she said, pushing 2 letters side by side. Each message has a slight difference. "This isn't gibberish, it's a cipher." Ria bent over the papers. "But what does it say?" Neha's throat was dry. "I don't know, but we have 3 hours to find out." The weight of her words hung in the air. 6:15 p.m. was coming. And this time, the victim was her. Neha pressed her fingers against her temple as a sudden, sharp pain shot through her skull. Her vision blurred, the edges of the room dissolving like wet paint. The sound of Ria flipping through documents became distant, distorted, as if she were underwater. And then, they were there, people, unfamiliar faces, standing inside her office, staring at her. A man in a gray suit with sunken eyes. A woman in a white dress, hair falling over her face. A little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit, her hollow gaze locked onto Neha. Neha's breath hitched. No, no, not now, not again. She blinked furiously, gripping the desk for support. "Neha," Ria's voice cut through the haze. The figures flickered, like a bad signal, then vanished. The headache eased, her vision cleared. Ria was looking at her with concern. "It's happening again, isn't it?" Neha exhaled sharply. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Ria crossed her arms. "These headaches, these episodes, they've been getting worse. Twice this week already. You need to see a doctor." Neha waved a dismissive hand. "I don't have time for doctors. I have until 6:15 p.m. to figure out who's behind these disappearances before I become one of them." Ria hesitated before sighing. "Fine, but if we get through today, you're booking an appointment." "No excuses." Neha didn't respond. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The first time it happened, 2 months ago, she had dismissed it as stress. A mild headache, a moment of disorientation, nothing serious. Then, the vision started. At first, it was just shadows. Blurry figures at the edges of her sight, gone when she turned to look. Then the voices, indistinct murmurs, whispers in a language she couldn't understand. Now, she was seeing people, clear as day, and they were staring at her like they knew her. But she refused to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it meant something was wrong with her. And Neha Sharma wasn't someone who broke down. She solved problems, and right now, the problem wasn't her hallucinations. The problem was who was behind these disappearances and why they wanted her next. Neha exhaled slowly, forcing her hands to stay steady. She stared at the cryptic symbols on the letter, willing them to make sense. Ria sat beside her, flipping through past case files. If this is a pattern, there has to be a key. The police must have missed something. Neha ran her fingers over the paper. The ink was slightly smudged, as if someone had written it in a hurry. But the strokes, they felt deliberate. Precise. She frowned. What if the key isn't in the letter? Ria glanced at her. Then where? Neha didn't answer. She was remembering something. 2 days ago, when she visited the first victim's house, his mother had mentioned something odd. He got that strange letter 2 days before he went missing, and he just kept staring at it, like he was trying to remember something. Neha's stomach twisted. Every victim got a letter. Every victim stared at it. Every victim disappeared at exactly 6:15 p.m. Was it possible that a sharp, searing pain shot through her skull? Not now. Please, not now. She clenched her teeth as her vision darkened at the edges. The letters on the page blurred, melted, until they weren't letters at all, but faces. Eyes staring at her from the ink. Mouths whispering. She felt them, around her, behind her, watching. She squeezed her eyes shut. 1, 2, 3. When she opened them, the letters were back. Ria was still beside her, oblivious. Neha swallowed hard. I need air. She pushed away from the desk and stepped outside, heart hammering against her ribs. Neha sat on the cold floor of her locked office, her back pressed against the door. Her breaths came in sharp, shallow bursts. The ticking clock on the wall was getting louder, like a countdown to something inevitable. 4:45 p.m. She had barely over an hour left. Her hands trembled as she stared at the cipher, her fingers tracing the odd, gibberish letters. Look inside you. You are the answer, and you aren't looking in the right direction. 15 words, 15 letters, including hers. Her mind raced. Each victim had received a letter. That was the only common thread. But If each letter was nonsense, how could this one suddenly be so clear? Then it hit her. It wasn't random. The answer wasn't just in her letter. It was in all the letters. Neha grabbed her notebook and flipped through the case files, pulling up copies of the previous victims' letters. The symbols, no, the words, they had a pattern. She scanned the first letter, then the second, then the third. Wait, wait, wait. Her heart pounded as she took the first letter of every word in the first victim's letter and wrote them down. A meaningless string. Then she took the second letter from the second victim's letter. Then the third letter from the third. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, the letters were forming words. She worked faster, flipping pages, marking patterns. The jumbled symbols unraveled, as if something had been hiding right in front of her all along. After an agonizing few minutes, she had it. A single, chilling message. You are not looking in the right direction. She read it again, and again, not looking in the right direction. Her stomach turned. Then she read the first part again. Look inside you. Neha felt the world tilt. The words sank into her bones. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a threat. This was a reality check. She was the answer. The missing people. Her breath caught. Her vision blurred. Suddenly, she wasn't in her office anymore. The room around her shifted. The walls flickered like a glitching screen, the papers in her hand vanishing. She was somewhere else. Somewhere sterile. The faint, clinical scent of antiseptic filled the air. A soft hum of machines. A distant voice, Neha. She turned, and for the first time, she saw her reflection. Not in a mirror, but in a window, a one-way observation glass. A woman in white stood on the other side, watching her. Neha staggered back. The room she was in wasn't her office. It was a patient's room. Her patient's room. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't an investigation. This wasn't a mystery. This was her mind breaking apart. She was never outside. She was never solving a case. And worst of all, she was never a journalist. The final countdown. The clock read 6:15 p.m. The sedative was kicking in. The visions, the missing people, the cryptic messages, all of it had been inside her mind all along. And just before she lost consciousness, before the drug pulled her back into oblivion, she saw her doctor's face on the other side of the glass. And she recognized her. The woman in white, the one she had been seeing for months. The one trying to bring her back to reality. Welcome back, Neha. The clock read 6:15 p.m. Neha's body felt heavy, the edges of her vision blurred, the world tilting ever so slightly. It was happening again. That sinking feeling, that shift. She gripped the desk, steadying herself as a sharp pain seared through her skull. The headache was back, the nausea, the voices. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Look inside you. You are the answer. The cipher's words haunted her. But she had figured it out. The missing people, the cryptic messages, the precise, eerie pattern of disappearances. It was all connected, but not in the way she thought. A cold chill crawled up her spine. No, Neha whispered. No, that can't be right. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning for something, anything, that would prove her wrong. Her investigation board was there, pinned with photographs and notes. But something was off. She focused on one of the missing person's images, an older man with tired eyes, a faint scar across his cheek. She had looked at that face 100 times. But now, something felt wrong. She turned her head, looking at another photo, a young woman, short hair, a timid smile. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edges of the image. She knew these people, not from some case, not from a file. She had seen them before. But where? Inside you. Her pulse spiked. Neha stumbled back from the desk, her head spinning. The missing people, they weren't missing. They were her fellow patients. The memories returned. A wave of nausea hit her as fragmented images rushed back. The man with the tired eyes, he sat across from her at breakfast. The young woman, she borrowed her books from the common room. The child, the little boy who waved at her every morning in the hallway. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't solved a mystery. She had created one. Piece by piece, her mind had fabricated an elaborate delusion to make sense of what was happening. She wasn't an investigative journalist. She was a patient, and every time she took her medication, the side effects would erase parts of her memory. Her brain, desperate to make sense of the gaps, had woven a story. A story where she was in control, where she was solving a case. But in reality, she was the case. Ria was never real. Neha's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Ria, Her assistant, the one who had called her that night, telling her about the disappearances. The one who had been by her side through the whole investigation. The one who had urged her to see a doctor. The only one who never vanished. Her throat went dry. "Rhea," she whispered. A sickening realization crawled into her chest. Rhea wasn't real. She was a voice in her head, her subconscious, trying to reach her. Trying to tell her the truth. She had been there all along, leaving breadcrumbs, urging Neha to wake up. But Neha never listened, not until now. The dizziness intensified, another headache, her knees buckled, and suddenly, she was falling. The walls flickered, the room twisted and bent, the floor beneath her melting away. And then, the vision, the one that came before every blackout. The woman in white, she was there, standing at the edge of the blur. For months, Neha had only seen her as a hazy silhouette, distant, untouchable. But this time, she was clear, her face was calm, familiar, her eyes were filled with sorrow. And as Neha's vision dimmed, as her body surrendered to the medication once more, she finally understood. The woman in white was her doctor. 6:20 p.m. The sedative took full effect. Neha's body stilled. The investigation was over. The missing people were never missing. They were just forgotten. And soon, she would forget them again.